They're the perfect plant for giving you a floral firework display at the end of the season. They're big, bold, bright, beautiful, come in many colours. And what are they? Dahlias, of course. The timetable starts in early spring, although you will find some of the dried tubers in the garden centres and do-it-yourself stores from January, February time. And not all of them look the same, and they will suffer being out of the ground so long. And as you can see, some are long and skinny, and some are a bit like me, a little bit short and round. But they all have exactly the same mechanics, shall we say, inside them. And you can see a collection of them that I've bought. It was 2 to a pack, and I bought 3 packs. This is the pom-pom, which is a perfectly formed flower, quite small. They never get much more than about 5 centimetres in diameter, 2 inches. And what you need is just to get these going. Now soak these overnight, you'll see that in another video. And pick the tubers up, and you look at them, they're pretty shriveled. And I wouldn't plant them directly in the ground at this stage. What I would be looking to do is to give them, as we are here, a start. And some of them, you can see, there are already shoots appearing on them. I've kept them in the shed rather a long time because it's been quite frosty weather. I didn't cover them with protection. I didn't want them to get too far advanced. But just give them a little shake. A lot of jiggling goes on at this time of the year, and you just need to get the compost between the tubers themselves. And all you're looking to do, if you want to plant them directly in the garden, then you can from a pot like this. I prefer to let them produce some shoots first that I take for cut-ins, and then I may or may not plant these tubers out into the garden. Generally, I would plant what's known as a green plant, which is a new cut-in that you've taken this spring. They grow more vigorously, they produce more flowers over a longer period, and the flowers themselves are slightly bigger. And at the end of the season, the tuber you will dig out of the ground will be a lot larger than these. So there we are. You can see with that one, it's got a little shoot, like a little horn that's just beginning to grow up. I'm hoping that by getting them started now, putting them in a decent light, where they are white and pale, they will begin to green up and actually start to give us decent shoots. But it's very important that you don't get them going too soon, because they have to be planted out after your last frost. So wherever you live, be thinking about that. And you look at about 8 weeks from this stage, or taking a cut-in, to planting out either the tuber or the cut-in in the garden. In the UK, usually you're looking at somewhere around the end of May if you're in the south, and it could be as late as the end of June the further north you go. But just look at the weather forecast, study it, and make sure the plants are hardened. They will take a light frost, but you don't want any setbacks. This is a decorative dahlia, Arabian Night. It's a lot darker than it is in the photographs. The photographs are not very good, so if you're familiar with the variety, then you won't worry about that. But if you're not, just check. Make a note of the name, look it up on the internet. The RHS site is very good. National Dahlia Collection. And you can see with this one, we've got a couple of buds all ready to go. But as I've said earlier, I would never risk these in the open ground. It's too hard. They've been grown in compost. They've been grown in pots as big as these, which is why the tubers are so small. And it's not ready to bash its way through the soil yet, even though your soil may be well prepared. So give them a start by getting them into a compost like this, allowing it to produce a bit of shoots on top and a bit of root underneath, and then it'll get away. And you could, if you wanted to, move them up again into another size pot later on. It all depends. Don't push them. But at the end of the summer, you will find that they'll come into flower, and they will really keep going well into October. Sometimes they will even make it as far as November in a particularly mild season. But you generally have to wait until the autumn frost has just blackened the foliage, and I'm just pointing out a few little shoots there you can see around the top. But you need the frost to blacken all foliage, and that really sends a message to the plant that autumn is on its way. Winter's not far, it's just around the corner, and it's time to pack up for the season. And then you can safely cut the plants down 150 millimeters of the ground, 6 inches, and that will be sufficient on top of that to just handle them by, really. That's all you want. You don't want to cut them too short because you need to drain moisture out of them. And you can see that again in a storage thing. But you can see by looking at these plants, they have hollow stems. So that means they hold a lot of water. And what you need to do is store them upside down for a short while whilst you drain all of the moisture out of the tuber before you actually put them into permanent store for winter time. In some areas where you have a light sandy soil or it's fairly free draining and dry during the winter time, you could possibly leave the tubers in the ground. But I would still be prepared when they began to shoot in the spring to take some cut-ins. My experience, I've always found the best looking plants always come on cut-ins that have been taken in the springtime and grown on during the summer. Now we come to the final two, and you can see the difference in all of them. And this is David Howard, and this photograph does them no justice at all. I find this a lovely apricot colour. It's got dark foliage. Not black, it's more of a bronzy colour that sets off the flowers on top. Now, this is probably the worst of all the ones I've gone, and I would be tempted to throw it away. But I always think we'll give them a chance. They've got the same chance as anything else. I can't see much there. The top is a little bit soft, and you can see it's still very, very shriveled. But we'll give it a go. We can see what happens. The worst that can happen is that we end up with nothing and we have to sort of just throw it away. But hopefully, and you'll see it on the other tuber, we'll get some cuttings from that one as well. The one thing you have to do, I think, I find, is to grow everything, because sometimes these plants can get muddled in the field, they can get muddled in the labelling, and what you see and what you buy isn't necessarily the same thing. So it's always worth verifying any plant at all. If you visit in a garden centre, it's always best to buy one that's in flower, because it confirms that what you're actually buying is what you want. So here we go with the last of David Howard, and this is a lovely plant introduced in the back end of the 20th century, and they say it's from David Howard, who's a well-known nurseryman. It's a fabulous nursery, the plants he's got there. You want to invest in one of his catalogues purely and simply as a reference book. But you can see there are lots of little shoots on the top, so we're not going to be without it. And if the worst came to the worst, then I would always hang on to these plants in their pots as mother plants. But as I say, you may want to, once they've got some tops on them, grown away, you may want to put them directly into the garden. There we are. Just leave a little bit of the shoulders, because obviously the compost will settle when you water it, but it doesn't matter if the shoulders of the tubers are sticking out of the compost at all. It helps to make the cut-ins, because when you take the cut-in at this time of the season, which I say is where I am, is mid-spring, you want to take a little bit of flesh of the tuber with it, so you're cutting away any more potential shoots that go with it. Then we now move on to a home-saved tuber, and this is one that I've been growing for a couple of seasons, and this is the peony dahlia, Bishop of Llandaff, one of the most famous. Beautiful dark bronze foliage, almost black. But you can see the size on the tuber there, and it may not look massive, but one of the things, or one of the characteristics of Bishop of Llandaff is that it actually produces small tubers. They get larger as each season goes by. And all I do is to lift them, put them in the pot. It's going back in the pot it's just come out of. There we are. That's where it fits nicely. And when I dig this one up at the end of the season, they'll go into a slightly larger pot. But the idea being that I store them like this. I just use old compost at the end of the season to cover the tubers. I've not got a greenhouse, I've not got any heat in the shed, but I just put them in the garden shed and I cover them with layers of sheets of newspaper, sheets of thermal fleece, anything to try and keep the frost out of the tubers themselves. They'll take a slight frost, the tubers, but you don't want to take the risk really. If the weather got really hard, then I would consider bringing them in and perhaps storing them in the house somewhere, spare room or under the stairs, only for a short period. It's surprising. In the winter, you get 3 or 4 days of hard weather, and when the damage is done, and that's ready now for, once again, just let it grow. The shoots come up, cut-ins and plant outside. And there they are, just sitting there, ready to go. Hopefully the ones that are laying down will green up now they've been exposed to the light, and they will be pulled up into strong shoots like these. And this is the effect that you want. And then you can see a cutting in the bottom left-hand corner, and you can see where the tubers, quite small, but you can see the vigour of the green on top. Diolch, and thank you for watching. Goodbye for now, but if you would like to see any more, please hit the subscribe and like buttons.